In 2016, hundreds of thousands of Koreans gathered every week for a candlelight vigil and successfully overthrew their corrupt administration and elected a new democratic leader. The world watched closely as Koreans demonstrated a non-violent, festive and peaceful demonstration against their government. Fast forward to 2018, with the success of the Inter-Korea Summit and the North Korea-US Summit, a peaceful atmosphere has settled on the Korean Peninsula as well as across Northeast Asia. Once again, the world is watching Korea closely, and the function of soft power has become more significant. We desire peace now more than ever. Let's take a look at the role soft power plays as a means to peace.
There has been very positive developments with respect to North Korean issues. South and North leaders had a very successful summit, and which was followed by DPRK and USA summit in Singapore. It was a very initial and historic moment to solve the problem through diplomatic ways. And there is a long way to go, but we are very much optimistic in achieving our ultimate goal of peace on the peninsula. Here we have a very special guest from Japan, Ms. Rui Ma츠gawa, Senator of Japan. Welcome to Korea and to Jeju.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be back here.
Well, you used to be a diplomat. Very much promising diplomat of Japan who also worked in Korea. What is your general image of Korea based on your experience in Korea? And also you visited Jeju this time, and I also wonder what kind of impression you have about Jeju.
Thank you for the question. Actually, for the Japanese people, I think Korea is a mystery, always like a place of wonder. And I visited many places during my stay in Korea. I stayed here Korea Seoul for 3 years. And Busan to Gwangju, Jeonju, and Jeju. And also I'm really amazed at how much you're skillful in terms of presenting yourself. I think Korea is really good at promotion of your own strengths to the outside world. And I'm sure Korea can be the leading nation for the public diplomacy, and you are fit for that. Thank you.
And what about Jeju?
Jeju, well, this time, I mean, it's a little bad because the weather is not so great, but the last time I came, I climbed at the Harura-san, and I walked around the nice path, and also the great facilities for the international conferences. I think this is a great place.
Jeju is actually an island for peace. So welcome to Peace Island. You know, you just mentioned that the Korean people and Japanese people are curious about each other, and I also believe that our two peoples learn from each other. So I am ambassador of public diplomacy, so I wonder what is the secret of the success of Japanese public diplomacy. Japan enjoys its national image as a peaceful country and the image of profound culture. Can you share the direction, the focus of Japanese public diplomacy?
Thank you for the nice words to Japan. But actually, I don't think Japan is not so good at public diplomacy very much. I think Japan has to learn much from Korea. But if Japan offers good image to the world as you described, I think it reflects just a reality. Japanese, it was not called public diplomacy, but what Japan has been doing is to sort of cultural diplomacy, try to introduce Japanese traditional culture like tea ceremony or ikebana. Ikebana is flower arrangements to the world through the embassies. Japanese embassies hold certain events to the people, for example in Korea, introducing Japanese tea ceremony. We have been doing these things for long time, decades. So even though Japanese government didn't pay much money for this cultural exchange, but I think as time goes, people in the world get to know what are the traditional Japan, and also the Japan determined to rebuild its nation as a peaceful country. So we were advocating the peaceful resolutions in the UN, or try to do the ODA in a manner that is beneficial to the country which receives, not for the Japanese company. So I think what Japan has done is not necessarily very skillful, but just disseminating what the reality is. And as decades goes, it helps creating the present Japanese image that peaceful country with profound culture, but with advanced technologies.
And you, as diplomat, you worked as a Deputy Secretary General of Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat, the cooperation among three countries, Korea, Japan, and China. Trilateral cooperation among three countries, what is your view? How we can cooperate better?
I think it's really important, and we have to admit, I think, the facts that the three countries, Japan, China, Korea, any of two countries' relation is not necessarily very smooth and flat. We have some difficult issues, historic, or maybe the current security issues. But I think it is also the fact that the three countries, Korea, Japan, and China, are the key countries in maintaining the peace and stability in this region. And the cooperation among three countries is a necessity. Because I had these 2 great years working together with Korean diplomats and Chinese diplomats, Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat. Most of the staffs were young people from 20 to 30s of three countries. As I worked, I realized the most effective ways to have cooperation among three countries is young people's exchange. We had a poll last year, and compared with 5-6 years ago, more Korean people have better impression to Japan now. I think it's due to the increase of the people who actually come to Japan, visit Japan, knows Japan, talk to Japanese people, see people around. That helps. So exchange of, especially the younger generations who will shoulder the future of Asia, of its own country, needs to have a better communication and actually know the country of each other. If Japanese young people goes to China or Korea more often, and then get to know the real Korea, real China, and make friends, that makes difference in the future. And I think we have to enlarge. The government needs to work on enlarging, and the inbound also can help.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. People-to-people interaction, and especially exchange among young people is quite important to strengthen mutual understanding and to strengthen the solidarity between our two people.
This Obuchi Kim Dae-jun partnership declaration made in 1998. We have 20 years passed, and this year marks 20th anniversary. And because of this growing necessity, geopolitical necessity, I think there is a momentum for the countries in the region, especially Japan and Korea, improve the relations. I think past cannot change. Past cannot change by anyone, but I think it is the will of the countries to focus more on the present and the future. And I think future is most important now. Future status of Northeast Asia. What kind of peninsula we can create? What kind of Northeast Asian region the countries can establish? I think we have to have that vision, and to working together to make this vision of common interest, including this North Korean piece, into it. If that can be the majority of what Japan and Korean talks, what China and Japan talks, what China and Korean talks, then even though we cannot change the past, I think we can manage the relations much productive, better, useful for future people, the younger generations.
So let's talk about the North Korean issues. As you mentioned, there have been summit between South and North and summit between United States and TPRK. And we noticed that there is a huge interest in Japan on what's going on the Korean Peninsula. What is a general assessment of Japanese people on this recent development?
I think it is really natural for Japan and Japanese people to be interested in the developments in the North and the US talks because it determines the fate of the situation and the threats level from North Korea to Japan. So it's very natural. And I think it's too early to assess, to be honest, because Japanese people do understand that the previous summit between the US and the North is just a kickoff. It's just a start of the process. We shouldn't forgotten that nuclearization issue, denuclearization is the condition for the peace. So that shouldn't be forgotten. Right after the summit, Kim Jong-un went to China. And I think I feel a little bit that this peninsula question now that comes not just between the US and the North, it's more between the US and China. So I think it's going to be more difficult to make this final denuclearization happen, I feel, personally. But I think because of that, Korea and Japan has to work together. I think the Japan and Korea are the two countries which shares almost identical strategic interest. We have to work together.
Sure.
And I think the leadership, President Moon Jae-in, Prime Minister Abe, maybe meets each other and then talk about these strategy and the future Northeast Asia is very important. I think leadership relations do affect the public diplomacy-wise, the people's sentiment.
Right. And I believe public diplomacy has very important role in boosting peace process on the peninsula. Yes. Through public diplomacy, we have to disseminate the message, especially toward North Korea, that if and once they change their course for denuclearization, complete denuclearization, then a bright future is ready for them. Let's talk about the public diplomacy, the future direction of public diplomacy. If our three countries, Korea, Japan, China, exclusively promotes its own national identity, then the whole structure in this region could be more competition-oriented. So, how do you think? I mean, we can deal with this issue of narrow-term nationalism?
I think nationalism is somewhat that we cannot escape. Each country has national pride, and sometimes you want to assert yourself. So I understand that is a sort of assumption that you have to take. And again, I think it's really important for countries looking future rather than focusing on the past. And I think because of the dynamic change in the geopolitical situations especially in Northeast Asia, I think it is really, really critical for each country, maybe working together to have what kind of framework or network or the relations in Northeast Asia you can think about. The vision should come to some more concrete steps, like what kind of energy cooperation, what kind of financial cooperation, what kind of new technology cooperation among Northeast Asian countries, or maybe a larger scale. Inclusion of even the North Korea, if it changes the course, that it can be a very important piece of this kind of network.
That's why we have to continue to face past the scaling while we are fully cooperating together for present and for the future. It's time for us to create some complementary identity as Northeast Asian in addition to our own national identity. So I hope that we can work together. Thank you very much.
고맙습니다.
감사합니다. My second guest is Professor Jay Wang, Director of Center on Public Diplomacy, University of Southern California, which is the leading academic institute in the field of public diplomacy. The concept of public diplomacy is originated from the United States. We would like to hear from him how the public diplomacy has been evolved since the inception, and the role of public diplomacy in the era of fourth industrial revolution, and also we'd like to hear his view on North Korean issues, peace initiative on the peninsula, and the role of public diplomacy. Professor Wang, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
How public diplomacy has been evolved in the United States in terms of target, in terms of strategy, and in terms of budget. Could you tell us about the whole development?
Okay. The public diplomacy work that we do, and then that I have seen in the case of the United States, we still face enduring challenges. So the enduring challenges will be, for instance, how do we build alliances and how do we strengthen alliances, but in a very different environment, in a digital environment, in a new kind of evolving geopolitical environment. So those are the things that we sort of been doing all along, but in a new context. But there are also new challenges that we also face. The new challenges, for instance, including how do we combat disinformation? How do we undermine communication, information coming from radical extremism? That's posing security challenges to the United States, but also many countries around the world. So these are sort of the newer challenges that we need to deal with through our public diplomacy work. And in terms of the public diplomacy work that we have seen in the case of the U.S.'s practices, I think the work is more policy-driven these days. And the work has a much more supported by a stronger, more solid infrastructure. And I think our public diplomats are better trained in both the online and offline engagements. Of course, these days that reskilling, upskilling, in these capacities is a constant need. And we do see that there are a lot of, there's quite a bit of investment in training and developing our public diplomats for the future.
As you said, the whole environment is changing. One of the change we are facing is technology change, and we are living in the era of fourth industrial revolution, and the technology it creates a new platform for public diplomacy. For example, President Trump, he is very good at the SNS in disseminating his idea and his argument. So it is the same direction of U.S. Public diplomacy?
So in general, I think the essence of the public diplomacy work, which is how does a country, does its outreach to peoples around the world, that remains the same. Because public opinion matters increasingly in this digital environment. And then it's also true that our publics in general don't have an informed view about international affairs. So there's all the more reason that we need to invest in that type of effort. And I also think that the digital communication has a bias towards more kind of extreme expressions rather than expressing more nuanced thinking, because that cuts abroad. That's digital communication is like that. So for general public, for the consumers, like we need to be very discerning when we encounter a piece of communication, whether it's from the President of the United States or from anyone else, that it may not be the entire picture, just because the nature of our communication environment is such that that just represents part of the view, may not represent the entire policy message, that in the previous era that you probably would take it that that's just because we don't have as many channels, that whatever the channel that's out there, that will be the official view, that will be the complete picture of the policy. I think these days we need, as consumers, information, especially in the public diplomacy space, when you are encountering information from other countries, that we need to be a little bit more discerning and trying to see it in a broader context. Of course, it also places a lot more responsibility on the diplomats, public diplomats, as they convey communication, because there is a chance that your communication is reaching people actually you're not intending to reach, and they may interpret and read the message differently. So I think we need to be also more discerning as a communicator, but certainly the consumers of information needs more discerning as we receive information and as we interpret the information that we encounter.
In public diplomacy, the direct goal is to win heart and mind of foreign people. Then how, in your view, how successful is U.S. public diplomacy? Especially recently, many people view United States less attractive than before. And the leadership of United States in terms of soft power is not increasing, if not decreasing. What is your assessment on your own public diplomacy?
On the soft power front, obviously, the government leads the effort in a public diplomacy in terms of engaging our publics overseas on our policies, and also, engaging in cultural relations. But I also think it's important, especially in the United States case, that the best asset the country has in soft power actually not coming from the government. It comes from the non-government, non-state sector, our civil society, our businesses. And I think it comes from the values, what the country stands for. And I think if you look at some of the other measures of soft power in terms of let's just say Americans' popular culture, our sports, our entrepreneurialism, right? Our innovation. I think these are the areas are still very much admired by publics overseas, and I think the non-state sector or even our subnational actors are really stepping up in this a very sort of in a more dispersed information environment, because digital technology allows all of us to be able to express. It may not be heard, but at least you can express. And I think in the U.S. case that we see sort of the non-government voices are more louder, their presence are more visible, and which is a great thing, because at the end of the day, soft power for any country rises from the people, from its society, not just government. Government is just as a facilitator.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned about soft power. How do you see soft power of Korea? In your view, what is the assets for Korea's soft power?
Yeah. Soft power takes a longer time to develop, to cultivate, and then you need to know how do you deploy that to to accomplish international relations goals. And I think South Korea has come a long way, obviously. And the strongest asset South Korea has would be its culture, right? So the Korean wave, everybody's familiar. It's popular globally, right? And I also think that Korea has tremendous infrastructure and capability in hosting big events, right? You just did the Pyeongchang Olympics, and I think one of the brilliant things coming out of Pyeongchang Olympics is that it really exemplifies what sports diplomacy is all about, right? So it is to bringing antagonistic, parties together, and to have conversations. So you did that.
The Pyeongchang Olympics has led to South-North Summit and United States DPRK Summit in Singapore. So sports diplomacy is also something we should pay attention to.
Absolutely. I mean, this is not really brand new, the concept, because it was a ping-pong diplomacy between the U.S. and China. And, Japan and South Korea jointly hosted the World Cup and the 2026 North American, right? Canada, U.S., and Mexico will be jointly hosting the World Cup. And I think 2026 also falls on the year that the founding, the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. So I think that when you have these mega events that attracts global attention, but also if it's jointly done by by two countries, or in the 2026 it will be by three countries, it speaks volume about the relationship and about a shared value, the shared ambition and shared goals of the countries, but also of the people. And I think those are absolutely, great public diplomacy platforms.
In the arena of public diplomacy, Korea is kind of a latecomer. We just took public diplomacy seriously only a few years ago. So what would be your suggestions for better public diplomacy of Korea?
I think Korea has quite a bit of innovative thinking in this, and I said earlier that the execution of some of these public diplomacy programs truly remarkable. And so I think that if any suggestions that I would have is to continue to think about how do we innovate this practice, because as a middle power country, maybe there is more flexibility, there's more room to explore, as opposed to great power nations that, because the military power is so very much present, that that there's always this dynamics. How do we balance those? I think as a middle power nation that you have more leeway to explore all of these. And I also think that Northeast Asia, the context, also provides a great opportunity for South Korea to explore, to test some of these approaches and programs, because the entire international system is undergoing transition. And so how do we evolve sort of the 21st century world order, and given East Asia, look at sort of the economies, right? And the impact this region has and also will have, but it's also the history that region has. I think it can play a very big role in how we think about what's the 21st century world order. And so the Koreans' contribution to this will help to, in the public diplomacy arena, will also help us to enrich our thinking about what are some of the possibilities and the different ways we may pursue public diplomacy, both in terms of strategy, but also in terms of the tactics.
Thank you very much for useful suggestions, very inspiring. And I appreciate your time and your insight and views shared with us. Thank you very much, Professor Wang.
Thank you very much.